The frigid Colorado wind howled through the cracks of the abandoned cabin like a wounded animal, as Brenna Sullivan huddled in the corner, clutching her threadbare shawl around her trembling shoulders. She had been on the run for 3 days, fleeing a past that seemed determined to follow her all the way across the frontier. And now the bitter winter of 1876 threatened to claim her life before her pursuers could. Brenna pressed her fingers to her lips, trying to suppress the chattering of her teeth as she listened to the storm raging outside. She had stumbled upon this dilapidated structure just as the blizzard descended, turning the world white and unforgiving. The cabin's roof was partially collapsed in one corner, allowing snow to drift inside, but it was better than facing the elements unprotected. Without matches or dry kindling, the small fireplace stood cold and empty, mocking her with the promise of warmth she couldn't create. Her hands, once soft and suited to playing the piano in her father's Denver home, were now raw and chapped from exposure. 23 years of privileged life had not prepared her for this moment alone, freezing and terrified in the Colorado wilderness. "Just make it through the night," she whispered to herself, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Just one night. A sound outside made her freeze, straining to hear over the howling wind. Hoofbeats. Someone was approaching. Brenna's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself deeper into the shadows, praying that whoever it was would pass by. But the hoofbeats slowed, then stopped, and a moment later, heavy boots crunched through the snow toward the cabin door. The door swung open with a groan of protest, and a tall figure stood silhouetted against the swirling snow. Brenna held her breath, trying to make herself invisible in the darkness. The man stomped his boots, shaking off snow, then stepped fully inside, closing the door behind him. He was massive, his shoulders broad beneath a heavy sheepskin coat, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat crusted with ice. Without noticing her, he moved to the fireplace, kneeling to examine it. "Needs a good clean-in," he muttered to himself, his voice deep and rough like river stones. "But it'll do." Brenna shifted slightly and a floorboard creaked beneath her. The man whirled around, his hand instantly going to the pistol at his hip. "Who's there?" he demanded, squinting into the darkness. Brenna swallowed hard, knowing she had nowhere to run. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible. "I mean no harm." The man moved with surprising quickness, striking a match that flared to life, illuminating his face. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' growth of beard. His eyes were as blue as a summer sky, a startling contrast to his weather-beaten face. "Well, I'll be," he said, surprise evident in his tone. "What in God's name is a woman doing out here alone?" "I needed shelter," Brenna replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm sorry if I'm trespassing." The man studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're half frozen." He struck another match and knelt by the fireplace, examining the contents. "You've been sitting here in the dark and cold all this time." "I had no way to light a fire," she admitted. He grunted, reaching into his saddlebag to pull out kindling and a small bundle of dry wood. "Well, that won't do at all. Can't have you freezing to death on my watch." Within minutes, he had cleared the chimney enough to ensure it would draw and built a small but efficient fire that quickly began to warm the cabin. The dancing flames cast his profile in sharp relief: a straight nose, high cheekbones, and a mouth that looked like it might smile easily under different circumstances. "Name's Beau Callahan," he said, not looking at her as he fed another stick to the growing flames. "Trail guide and sometimes hunter, depending on what pays better." Brenna hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "Brenna Sullivan," she finally offered. "Well, Miss Sullivan, you picked a poor night to be wandering the mountains." He stood and removed his coat, revealing a lean but powerful frame beneath a worn flannel shirt. "Storm's only gettin' worse. We're both stuck here till mornin' at least." Brenna felt a flicker of panic. Alone in a cabin with a stranger was hardly proper, but then again, neither was freezing to death. Are you certain there's no way to travel tonight?" Beau gave her an incredulous look. "Madam, there's a foot of snow out there already and more comin' down. A person wouldn't make it half a mile before gettin' lost and frozen solid." He gestured toward the fire. "Best come closer and warm yourself. I don't bite." Cautiously, Brenna moved toward the fire, drawn by its warmth. As she stepped into the light, Beau's eyes widened slightly. Despite her disheveled appearance, her honey-brown hair escaping its pins, her once fine traveling dress mudded and torn, there was no disguising her beauty, or the fact that she was a lady of some refinement. "You're a long way from wherever you belong," he observed quietly. "Yes," she agreed, not offering more. Beau nodded, respecting her reticence. "Hungry?" he asked, pulling a bundle from his pack. "It's just jerky and hardtack, but it's better than an empty stomach." Brenna hadn't eaten since the previous day, and her stomach twisted at the mention of food. "Thank you," she said, accepting a piece of the tough, dried meat. "That's very kind." They ate in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind screamed around the cabin's corners, making the walls creak in protest. "Whatever you're running from," Beau said finally, "it must be mighty bad to have you out in this weather alone." Brenna's head snapped up. "What makes you think I'm running from something?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Miss Sullivan, I've been readin' tracks since I was a boy. People's stories ain't so different from animal trails once you know what to look for." He took a sip from his canteen. "No woman dressed like you, with hands that ain't never done hard labor, ends up in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere by chance." Brenna looked down at her hands, embarrassed by their softness in the face of his obvious capability. "Perhaps I simply made a poor choice of travel plans." "Perhaps," he agreed, not pushing further. "Well, whatever the case, you're safe enough for tonight. I'll keep the fire going." "You don't seem concerned about propriety," Brenna ventured. Beau laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. "Madam, out here, propriety takes a back seat to survival. I reckon your reputation will survive one night in a cabin with a trail guide, especially since no one's around to gossip about it." Despite herself, Brenna smiled. There was something disarming about his frankness. "I suppose you're right, Mr. Callahan." "Beau," he corrected. "No one's called me Mister since I left Tennessee, and I don't miss it." "Beau then," she agreed, "and you may call me Brenna under the circumstances." He nodded, adding another log to the fire. "So, Brenna, where were you headed before the storm caught you?" She hesitated. "West," she finally said. "Just west." "That's a mighty big direction," he observed. "Any particular part of west you were aiming for?" "I hadn't decided yet," she admitted. "Somewhere I could start fresh." Beau's eyes softened with understanding. "Run into, not just from then. That's something, at least." A particularly violent gust of wind shook the cabin, and Brenna jumped as a section of the roof creaked ominously. "She'll hold," Beau assured her. "This place was built solid. Just needs some care." "You know this cabin?" Brenna asked, curious. "Used to belong to an old trapper named McCready," Beau explained. "Good man. Taught me a lot about these mountains when I first came west. He passed on 3 winters ago, and no one's claimed the place since." His eyes scanned the abandoned dwelling with something like affection. "Shame to see it fallen apart." "It saved my life tonight," Brenna said softly. "And so did you." Beau looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just did what anyone would do." He stood abruptly. "Best get some rest." "I'll take first watch." "Watch? For what?" "Force of habit," he said with a shrug. Never hurts to keep an eye out, especially in weather like this. Animals get desperate, people too sometimes. The reminder of potential danger sent a chill through Brenna that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Do you think someone might find us here?" Beau gave her a sharp look. "You expectin' someone to be lookin'?" Brenna looked away. "No, of course not." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't press. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes." Brenna settled down near the fire, using her cloak as a blanket. Despite her exhaustion, sleep seemed impossible with a stranger just feet away. Yet there was something reassuring about Beau's solid presence. The methodical way he tended the fire, the alert set of his shoulders as he occasionally glanced toward the windows. "Thank you," she murmured again, her eyes growing heavy despite her anxiety. "For the fire, for everything." The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Beau's profile against the flames, his expression thoughtful as he watched over her. When Brenna awoke, pale morning light was filtering through the cabin's grimy windows. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. She sat up, disoriented, to find Beau by the door peering outside. "Snow's stopped," he announced without turning, "but there's near 3 feet of it out there." Brenna stood, wincing at her stiff muscles. "Does that mean we can leave?" "We could try," he said, turning to face her. In the daylight, she could see the fatigue lining his face. He'd kept watch all night. But it wouldn't be wise. Snow this deep, it's easy to get lost, even for someone who knows these mountains. Horse would struggle too. Disappointment settled in Brenna's stomach. Every day she remained stationary increased the chance of being found. "How long do you think we'll need to stay?" Beau seemed to sense her urgency. "A day, maybe 2. Sun's strong this time of year, even in winter. It'll melt enough to make travel safer." He studied her face. "You in some kind of hurry?" Brenna smoothed her skirts, avoiding his gaze. "I simply don't wish to impose on your kindness any longer than necessary." "Not much of an imposition," he said with a slight smile. "My plans weren't any more pressing than yours, it seems." He moved to the fireplace, stirring the embers and adding more wood. "I need to check on my horse and bring in more firewood. Then maybe we can see about finding something more substantial than jerky for breakfast." "You hunt?" Brenna asked. "When necessary," he replied. "Got traps too. Might be able to catch a rabbit if we're lucky." He pulled on his coat. "Stay by the fire, I won't be long." After he left, Brenna took stock of the cabin in daylight. It was small but solidly built, with a single room containing the fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and what had once been a bed frame, now missing its mattress. Shelves lined one wall, mostly empty save for a few cracked plates and cups. A layer of dust covered everything, but beneath it, she could see that the cabin had once been a proper home. Wanting to be useful, she found a relatively clean rag and began wiping down the table and chairs. By the time Beau returned, his arms laden with firewood, she had managed to clear away some of the grime. "You didn't need to do that," he said, looking surprised. "I wanted to help," she replied. "I'm not entirely helpless despite appearances." He set down the wood and gave her an appraising look. "Never thought you were helpless, just out of your element." He brushed snow from his coat. "Horse is fine. Got him sheltered under that lean-to out back. Found some old traps too, set a couple along the tree line." "Do you think we'll catch anything?" "Maybe. Animals will be moving now that the storm's passed, looking for food." He glanced at her torn dress. "Found something else too." From his pack he pulled out a bundle of fabric. "Old clothes Macready kept. Thought they might be warmer than what you're wearing." Brenna unfolded the bundle to find a man's flannel shirt and woolen trousers. They would be enormous on her, but they were clean and whole, unlike her increasingly bedraggled dress. "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. Beau cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. "I'll step outside while you change. Give a shout when you're decent." Once alone, Brenna quickly changed into the borrowed clothes. The shirt hung to her knees, and she had to roll the pants up several times and secure them with a piece of rope. But the warm fabric was a blessing after days in her ruined dress. "You can come back in," she called. Beau's eyebrows rose when he saw her, and a smile tugged at his lips. "Well, you won't be winning any fashion contests, but at least you won't freeze." "Fashion seems a small concern under the circumstances," she replied, returning his smile. They spent the morning making the cabin more habitable. Beau patched the worst holes in the roof with materials he found in the lean-to, while Brenna continued cleaning. By midday, the place was considerably more comfortable, and Beau returned from checking his traps with 2 rabbits. "Ever skinned a rabbit?" he asked, holding them up. Brenna blanched. "I can't say that I have," he laughed at her expression. "Don't worry, I wouldn't ask you to, but you might want to step outside while I do it. Some folks find it unsettling." "I'll stay," she said, lifting her chin. "If I'm to survive out here, I should learn these things." Beau gave her an appraising look, then nodded. "All right, then." He taught her to build a spit over the fire, explaining each step as he prepared the rabbits. Brenna fought back her initial revulsion, focusing instead on the practical knowledge he was sharing. By the time the meat was roasting, filling the cabin with a mouth-watering aroma, she felt a small sense of accomplishment. "You're a quick study," Beau commented as they sat down to eat. "I've always been adaptable," she replied. "Though I admit, this is testing my limits." The rabbit was delicious after days of scant rations, and Brenna ate with unladylike enthusiasm that made Beau smile. As they ate, the silence between them grew comfortable rather than strained. "So, Tennessee," Brenna said finally, curious about her rescuer. "What brought you west?" Beau's expression grew distant. "War," he said simply. "After Shiloh, I couldn't stomach going home, too many ghosts." He took a drink from his canteen. "Headed west instead. Worked cattle drives, tried my hand at mining, eventually found my place in these mountains. As a guide," he nodded. "People need someone who knows the land, especially with more folks heading to California and Oregon these days." He studied her face. "What about you? What's a Denver society lady doing running west all alone?" Brenna's head snapped up. "How did you know I'm from Denver?" "Your boots," he said, nodding toward where her own shoes dried by the fire. "Only place within 200 miles that makes that style. Plus, your accent's got that particular Denver polish to it." She sighed, realizing there was little point in deception. "Yes, I lived in Denver. My father was quite successful in banking." He died 6 months ago," she said, the grief still fresh. "Typhoid." "I'm sorry," Beau said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Thank you." Brenna stared into the fire, debating how much to reveal. "After his death, I discovered he had arranged a marriage for me, to a business associate." Beau's brow furrowed. "Arranged marriages ain't so common these days." "It wasn't forced," she clarified, "but it was strongly encouraged. My father left everything to his bank partner, Mr. Hargrove, with the understanding that I would marry his son Stuart and thus remain provided for." "And this Stuart, he's not to your liking." Brenna's laugh held no humor. "Stuart Hargrove is a cruel, controlling man who has already buried one wife. There were rumors," she stopped herself. "Let's just say I had reason to fear the match." Understanding dawned in Beau's eyes. "So you ran?" "Yes." Brenna met his gaze directly. "I took what little money was truly mine and left 3 days ago. Stuart is not a man who accepts defiance. He'll be looking for me." Beau was silent for a long moment. "Well," he finally said, "that explains the hurry." Does it change things? She asked cautiously. Now that you know I'm essentially a fugitive, he considered this, then shook his head. A woman has the right to choose her own path, I reckon. Especially when the alternative puts her in danger. He leaned forward. But these mountains in winter are a different kind of danger, Brenna, one that doesn't care about your reasons or your courage. I know it was foolish, she admitted, but I was desperate. Desperate folks don't always make the best decisions, he agreed. But sometimes even a bad decision is better than no decision at all. They fell silent again, the fire crackling between them as twilight descended outside. Brenna felt strangely unburdened having shared her story, though worry about Stuart's pursuit remained. What will you do? Beau asked eventually. Once the snow melts enough to travel, continue west, I suppose, find somewhere to start over. She looked around the cabin. Learn to survive. That's a tall order for someone with no experience of frontier life. Brenna bristled slightly. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Callahan. Never said you were, he replied easily. But there's work and then there's survival, two different things entirely. Then I'll learn, she said firmly. What choice do I have? Beau studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. I could help, he finally said. Take you somewhere safe, teach you what you need to know. Brenna was startled by the offer. Why would you do that? He shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with her direct gaze. Maybe I've got my own ghosts I'm running from, or maybe I just don't like the idea of someone like Stuart Hargrove winning. He stood, moving to add wood to the fire. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll see if the snow's melted enough to move on. That night, as Brenna lay near the fire wrapped in a blanket Beau had found in a trunk, she found herself studying his profile as he kept watch. There was something comforting about his solid presence, something trustworthy in his straightforward manner. For the first time since leaving Denver, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps her desperate flight wouldn't end in disaster after all. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sunlight on the snow almost blinding in its intensity. Beau went out early to check the surrounding area, returning with news that the snow had indeed begun to melt. We can probably head out tomorrow, he announced. It'll be slow going, but my horse can manage. We can double up until we reach the next town. Brenna felt a curious mix of relief and reluctance. Relief at continuing her journey to safety, reluctance at leaving the unexpected sanctuary they'd created in the abandoned cabin. They spent the day preparing for travel, with Beau showing Brenna how to pack efficiently and what supplies were essential. He seemed to have decided to take her education in wilderness survival seriously, explaining each lesson with patience and occasional humor. "No, like this," he said, demonstrating how to tie a particular knot. "If you do it your way, first strong wind will have your bedroll halfway to Kansas." "I've never been particularly domestic," Brenna admitted, trying again. "We had servants for such things." "Well, out here, you're the servant, the cook, and the repair crew all in one," Beau replied, but his tone was light. "There, that's better." By evening, they had prepared as much as possible for the journey ahead. Over another meal of rabbit, supplemented with some wild onions Beau had found growing near the cabin, they discussed their route. "Nearest town is Timberline, about 3 days' ride in good conditions," Beau explained. "With the snow, might take 4 or 5. From there, you can decide where to head next." "Have you been to Timberline before?" Brenna asked. "Many times. It's small but decent. Got a general store, a hotel, even a schoolhouse now." He hesitated. "Also got a telegraph office. If this Hargrove fellow is looking for you, word might have reached there." Brenna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What would you suggest?" Beau considered this. "We could bypass Timberline, head straight for Eagle Pass. It's further but less connected. Fewer questions." But more dangerous, potentially, he admitted. Longer stretch without supplies, rougher country. He met her eyes. Your call, Brenna. I'll get you where you want to go. She studied his face, finding nothing but sincerity there. I trust your judgment, she finally said. If you think Eagle Pass is safer, then that's where we'll go. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her trust. All right, then. Eagle Pass it is. That night, as the fire burned low, Brenna found sleep elusive. Tomorrow they would leave this unexpected haven and face whatever dangers lay ahead. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Beau," she said softly, uncertain if he was awake. Came his response from the darkness. "Thank you for everything." There was a pause before he replied. "Get some sleep, Brenna. Long day tomorrow." Morning brought a flurry of final preparations. Beau packed their meager supplies while Brenna made a last effort to clean the cabin, feeling a strange sense of obligation to leave it better than they'd found it. "It's a good place," she commented as they prepared to depart. "It just needs someone to care for it." Beau nodded, looking around the small space with a thoughtful expression. "Macready loved it here. Said it was the only place he ever felt truly at home." "I can understand that," Brenna said softly. "Even in such a short time, it's provided more safety than I've felt in months." Beau's horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Samson, waited patiently outside. Beau helped Brenna mount, then swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back. "Ready?" he asked, his breath tickling her ear. "As I'll ever be," she replied, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her stomach at his proximity. They set off through the snow, Beau guiding Samson with expert ease despite the double burden. The going was slow, as he'd predicted, but the day was clear and relatively warm for February. Brenna found herself marveling at the beauty of the snow-covered landscape, so different from the manicured gardens she was accustomed to. "It's breathtaking," she said as they crested a rise, revealing a panoramic view of mountains stretching to the horizon. "Never gets old," Beau agreed, "even after all these years. How long have you been in Colorado?" 8 years or so. Came west right after the war ended in '65, bounced around for a while before settling here. "And you've been guiding all that time?" "Mostly. Did some trapping, some prospecting. Even tried ranching for a spell, but I'm not much for staying in one place." There was something in his tone that suggested there was more to the story, but Brenna didn't press. They made good progress that day, stopping to rest Samson periodically but pushing on until the light began to fade. Beau found them a sheltered spot between some boulders to make camp, teaching Brenna how to help set up their simple shelter, a canvas tarp stretched to provide protection from the elements. That night, huddled close for warmth under shared blankets, Brenna found herself acutely aware of Beau's presence beside her. He was scrupulously respectful, maintaining as much distance as the small shelter allowed, but the intimacy of their situation was undeniable. "Tell me about your life in Denver," he said unexpectedly, his voice quiet in the darkness, "before everything went wrong." Brenna was surprised by the request but found herself wanting to share. "It was comfortable," she began. "My father built his bank from nothing after moving west from Boston when I was small. My mother died when I was born, so it was just the two of us. Must have been lonely." "Sometimes," she admitted, "but father made sure I had the best education, the finest things. I played piano, spoke French, attended all the right social events." She laughed softly, "none of which is particularly useful out here." "Don't sell yourself short," Beau replied. "You've adapted better than most would." "What about you?" she asked. "What was Tennessee like?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Green," he finally said. "Everything so green you'd think God had just painted it that morning. Our farm wasn't large, but the soil was good. Pa grew tobacco, kept some livestock. Ma made the best peach preserves in the county. His voice grew distant with memory. Had 2 brothers and a sister, all gone now. The war, Brenna asked gently. War took my brothers. Typhoid took my sister and mother in '63. Pa just faded after that, was gone by the time I made it home from fighting. I'm sorry, Brenna said, understanding now why he'd chosen to leave his home behind. Long time ago, he said, though his tone suggested the wounds were still fresh. Get some sleep now. Another long day tomorrow. Despite the hard ground beneath them and the cold that seeped through even their shared blankets, Brenna slept surprisingly well, lulled by the steady sound of Beau's breathing beside her. The next day brought challenges as the terrain grew more difficult. They had to dismount frequently to lead Samson through particularly deep snow or treacherous passages. By midday, Brenna's legs ached, and her borrowed boots, too large and stuffed with rags to make them fit, had rubbed blisters on her heels. We need to rest, Beau announced, noting her increasingly labored breathing. There's a spot up ahead where we can get out of the wind. The spot turned out to be a shallow cave in the hillside, just deep enough to provide shelter. Beau helped Brenna sit, then knelt to examine her feet. Should have checked these sooner, he said, frowning at the raw blisters. My fault. Hardly, Brenna protested. I should have said something. He shook his head, reaching into his pack for a small tin. Salve, he explained, opening it to reveal a pungent ointment. It'll help. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he applied the medicine to her injuries, then wrapped her feet with strips of clean cloth. Brenna found herself studying his face as he worked, the concentration in his blue eyes, the way his brow furrowed slightly, the unexpected tenderness in hands that looked made for rougher tasks. Thank you, she said when he finished. He looked up, their faces suddenly close, and for a moment, something passed between them, a current of awareness that had nothing to do with their precarious situation. Then, Beau cleared his throat and moved away, busying himself with checking Samson's hooves. We'll rest here a bit longer, he said, his voice slightly gruff. No sense pushing too hard and making those blisters worse. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, supplemented with a handful of dried berries Beau had in his pack. As they ate, he pointed out landmarks in the distance, teaching Brenna how to orient herself in the wilderness. See that peak there? That's Eagle's Head. Keep it on your right and you'll always know you're heading west. He glanced at her. Useful thing to remember just in case. In case of what? He shrugged. In case we get separated, or in case you ever need to find your way alone. The thought sent a wave of anxiety through her. Do you think that's likely? No, he said quickly. But out here it pays to be prepared for anything. They set off again after the rest, making slower but steady progress through the afternoon. By evening, they had reached a small plateau that offered a view of the valley below. We've made good time, Beau said, surveying their position. Another 3 days should see us to Eagle Pass, weather permitting. That night, as they huddled again under shared blankets, the temperature dropped sharply. Brenna couldn't suppress her shivers, her teeth chattering despite her efforts to remain silent. This won't do, Beau muttered after several minutes. You'll freeze before morning. Before she could protest, he had pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. The sudden warmth of his body against hers was startling but undeniably welcome. Better? He asked, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. Yes, she admitted, gradually relaxing as the warmth spread through her. Thank you. Just survival, he said, though there was something in his voice that suggested it might be more than that. Nothing improper about staying alive. Brenna found herself smiling in the darkness. I'm beginning to think propriety is largely a luxury of civilization. His soft chuckle vibrated against her. Now you're learning." Despite the innocent necessity of their closeness, Brenna was acutely aware of each point of contact between them, his arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, their legs tangled together for warmth. It had been so long since she'd been held by anyone, and never like this, with such comfortable intimacy. She fell asleep to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling safer than she had any right to under the circumstances. The third day of travel brought new challenges as a cold rain began to fall, turning the snow to treacherous slush. They pressed on, both soaked and miserable by midday, when Beau spotted a lined shack used by cattle hands in the summer months. "It won't be much," he warned as they approached the small structure, "but it'll be dry." The shack was indeed basic, a single room with a small stove, a rough bunk, and little else. But after hours in the cold rain, it seemed a palace to Brenna. Beau quickly got a fire going in the stove while she wrung out her soaked clothing as best she could. "You need to get out of those wet things," Beau said matter-of-factly. "I'll step outside while you change into the dry clothes in my pack." Once alone, Brenna stripped off her sodden garments, shivering violently as the cold air hit her damp skin. The dry shirt and trousers Beau had offered were heaven against her chilled body, though they hung on her slender frame like sacks. When Beau returned, he had shed his own wet coat and shirt, wearing only a thin undershirt that clung to his muscular torso. Brenna found herself unable to look away from the broad expanse of his shoulders, the powerful lines of his arms as he hung their wet clothing near the stove to dry. "Rain's picking up," he reported, seemingly oblivious to her scrutiny. "Might be best to wait it out here." They spent the afternoon in the small shack, the space growing warm and comfortable as the stove worked its magic. Beau discovered a deck of cards in a drawer and taught Brenna to play poker, using buttons as chips. "You're a natural," he commented after she'd won her third hand in a row. "Got a good poker face." "Years of society dinners," she replied with a smile. "You learn to hide what you're thinking when surrounded by people looking for weaknesses." Beau studied her, his expression suddenly serious. "Is that what your life was like, always having to guard yourself?" Brenna considered the question. "In many ways, yes. Father was well respected, but banking creates as many enemies as friends, and after he died—" She trailed off, remembering the whispers, the calculating looks, the sudden attention from men who had never spared her a glance before. "After he died, you became a target," Beau finished for her. "A valuable asset to be acquired." "Exactly." She was surprised by his perception. "Stuart Hargrove was the most persistent. At first, I thought he truly cared for me, but then I began to hear stories about his first wife." "What kind of stories?" Brenna hesitated, then decided Beau deserved the full truth. That she hadn't died of illness as reported, but from injuries. That Stuart had a violent temper, that he saw her as property, not a partner. She met Beau's gaze directly. "When Father's will was read and I learned of their arrangement, I knew I couldn't go through with it, no matter the cost." Beau's expression hardened. "Men like that," he said, his voice low and tight, "they don't deserve the name." Something in his tone made Brenna wonder if he'd encountered such men before, perhaps even confronted them. There was a darkness in his eyes that hadn't been there moments ago. "Have you?" She began hesitantly. "Have you ever had to run from something similar?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, slowly, he said, "Not me. My sister." His fingers tightened around the playing cards he held. "Her husband was a mean drunk, used his fists more often than his words. By the time I came home from the war and found out, it was too late. Typhoid had taken them both." "I'm so sorry," Brenna whispered, understanding now the depth of his willingness to help her, Beau shrugged, but the casual gesture couldn't disguise the pain in his eyes. It's why I don't abide men who think strength gives them the right to control others. He set down the cards, clearly finished with the game. And it's why I'll make damn sure Hargrove doesn't find you. The conviction in his voice sent a shiver through Brenna, one that had nothing to do with the cold. In that moment, she realized that her trust in this man had grown into something deeper admiration, certainly, but also a flutter of attraction that she'd been trying to ignore. The rain continued through the evening, drumming on the roof and creating a cocoon of isolation around them. They shared a simple meal from Beau's supplies, sitting close beside the stove, their conversation flowing more easily now that barriers had begun to fall. "What will you do?" Beau asked as they finished eating. Once we reach Eagle Pass, Brenna had been asking herself the same question. Find work, I suppose. I can read and write well, keep accounts. Perhaps a shop would hire me as a clerk. And then, she smiled slightly. One step at a time, Mr. Callahan. First survival, then prosperity. He returned her smile, and something in his eyes made her heart skip. A sensible approach. That night, with only one narrow bunk in the shack, they faced a dilemma. Beau immediately offered to sleep on the floor, but Brenna wouldn't hear of it. "You've spent 2 nights on frozen ground for my sake," she said firmly. "The bunk is yours. And leave a lady to sleep on the floor. My mother would haunt me for sure." They argued good-naturedly, until reaching a compromise they would share the bunk back to back, a blanket between them for propriety's sake. It was a tight fit, and despite the barrier, Brenna was intensely aware of Beau's warmth behind her, the solid strength of his back against hers. "Brenna," he said softly, just as she was drifting off to sleep, "whatever happens in Eagle Pass, know that you don't have to face it alone." The simple statement, offered without expectation or demand, touched her deeply. "Thank you," she whispered back. "That means more than you know." Morning brought clearing skies and renewed determination. Their clothes had dried overnight, and they set out early, both tacitly avoiding mention of the growing intimacy between them. The terrain grew more rugged as they climbed higher into the mountains, but Samson proved as sure-footed as ever. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a pass that offered a stunning view of the valley below and the peaks beyond. Beau reined in Samson, allowing them both to appreciate the vista. "It's magnificent," Brenna breathed, taking in the sweep of wilderness before them. "Worth every hardship," Beau agreed, his voice close to her ear. "This is what I love about guiding, showing folks beauty they might never otherwise see." "Is that why you do it?" "For the beauty," she felt him shrug behind her. "Partly. Also for the freedom. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his name or his past." He paused. Not many places left like that. Brenna understood the appeal all too well. No expectations but those you set for yourself. Exactly. There was approval in his voice. "You understand more than most city folks." They continued on, making good progress until dusk approached. Beau found them a protected spot to camp, and their evening routine had developed a comfortable familiarity, setting up the shelter, gathering firewood, preparing their simple meal. As they sat beside the fire, the stars emerging in the clear night sky above, Brenna found herself watching Beau's face in the flickering light. He was undeniably handsome, though not in the polished way of Denver's society men. His features were strong rather than refined, weathered by years outdoors, his hands calloused from work rather than smooth with idleness. Yet there was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged exterior, a consideration in his actions that spoke of a deeply ingrained respect. "You're staring," he said without looking up from the coffee he was brewing over the fire. Brenna felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking about how different you are from the men I knew in Denver. Now he did look up, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. Different how? She considered her words carefully. They wore their refinement like armor, but underneath many were hollow, all manners and no substance. She met his gaze. You're the opposite. No pretense, just authenticity. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. Don't know that anyone's ever called me authentic before. It's a compliment, she assured him, smiling. Then thank you. He handed her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Though I reckon I'm just too old to bother with pretending to be something I'm not. How old are you? She asked, realizing she didn't know. 34 next month, he replied, ancient by some standards. Hardly, she laughed. I'm 23 and I feel as though I've lived several lifetimes already. Life does that sometimes, he agreed. Packs more into a few years than seems possible. They fell into companionable silence, sipping their coffee and watching the stars. The night was cold but clear, and Brenna found herself marveling at how quickly she'd adapted to this nomadic existence. There was a simplicity to it that appealed to her, the basic needs of food, shelter, and warmth taking precedence over social obligations and appearances. I never thanked you properly, she said suddenly, for risking your own safety to help me. Beau looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. Didn't do anything special, just what needed doing. Nevertheless, she persisted, you could have left me at that cabin or in Timberline. Instead, you're going miles out of your way to see me safely to Eagle Pass. He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Maybe I had my own reasons, he finally said, his voice low. Maybe I was tired of traveling alone. The admission hung between them, simple yet profound. Brenna felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared loneliness, of unexpected connection. Well, she said softly, I'm glad for the company, whatever your reasons. His eyes met hers across the fire, and the look in them made her breath catch. There was warmth there, and something more, a question perhaps, or a possibility neither of them was ready to name. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings, until Beau finally looked away, clearing his throat. Should turn in, he said gruffly. Early start tomorrow. That night, as they huddled together beneath their shared blankets, the pretense of maintaining distance had been abandoned. Brenna lay with her head on Beau's shoulder, his arm around her, both of them acknowledging without words that the arrangement was no longer merely about survival. The fourth day of their journey brought them through increasingly familiar territory for Beau, who pointed out landmarks and shared stories of previous travels through the area. By mid-afternoon, they had descended into a sheltered valley that offered easier going, and Beau announced they would reach Eagle Pass by the following evening. What's it like? Brenna asked, curious about their destination. Eagle Pass. Small, Beau replied. Maybe 300 souls. Got a hotel, couple of saloons, a church. People mostly mind their own business, which suits us fine. He hesitated. I know someone there, a widow named Mrs. Chen, who runs a boarding house. She might be willing to take you in, maybe offer work. Chinese? Brenna asked, surprised. She came over during the gold rush with her husband. He died in a mining accident, but she stayed on, built a good life for herself. There was respect in his voice. She's a fair woman, tough but kind, doesn't tolerate nonsense. She sounds remarkable, Brenna commented. I'd be grateful for an introduction. They made camp early that evening, both tacitly recognizing that their journey was nearing its end. As they sat by the fire after their meal, Brenna found herself reluctant to contemplate what would happen once they reached Eagle Pass. The prospect of parting ways with Beau left an unexpected ache in her chest. What will you do? She asked, voicing the question that had been troubling her. After you've delivered me safely to Eagle Pass, Beau poked at the fire, his expression unreadable. Haven't decided yet, Usually head south this time of year, guide hunting parties through the lower ranges. He glanced at her. What about you? Still planning to work as a clerk, if I can find such a position, she replied. Though I confess the idea holds less appeal than it did a few days ago. Oh. His tone was casual, but his eyes were intent. What's changed? Brenna hesitated, uncertain how to express the shift in her perspective. I've discovered I enjoy the open air more than I expected, she finally said. The freedom of it, the possibility. She smiled slightly. Perhaps I'm not as suited to indoor work as I thought. Beau studied her for a long moment. There are other options, he said carefully, for someone with your education and quick mind. Such as, he seemed to choose his words with deliberation. Eagle Pass has no proper school yet. Children learn from whoever has the time and knowledge to teach them. A woman who can read and write, who knows figures and perhaps a bit of French, she'd be valuable there. The idea took root immediately in Brenna's imagination. Teaching had always appealed to her, though it had never seemed a practical option in Denver's social circles. Do you really think they would accept an outsider as a teacher? People in these mountains judge by what you can do, not where you came from, Beau replied. Show them you're capable and committed, they'll welcome you quick enough. The conversation drifted to other topics, but the seed had been planted. As they prepared for sleep, Brenna found herself envisioning a future in Eagle Pass not just as a temporary refuge, but perhaps as a home. Their last night on the trail held a bittersweet quality, both of them aware that their unique intimacy would soon end. As they lay together beneath the stars, Beau's arm around her had become as natural as breathing, his heartbeat beneath her ear a rhythm she had grown accustomed to. Brenna, he said quietly, his voice a rumble in his chest, there's something I should tell you. She tilted her head to look up at him. What is it? He seemed to struggle with his words, unusual for a man typically so direct. I wasn't entirely truthful before. About why I was in that part of the mountains when I found you. Brenna felt a flicker of unease. Oh, I wasn't just passing through, he admitted. I was heading back to McCready's cabin. I go there sometimes when I need to think or be alone with memories. His arm tightened slightly around her. I'd been considering fixing it up, making it a permanent place. You were thinking of settling down, Brenna was surprised, but you said you prefer not staying in one place. I do, he sighed. But a man gets tired of wandering eventually. Starts thinking about having somewhere to return to. He was quiet for a moment. Somewhere that feels like home. The admission hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to fully address. Brenna felt her heart quicken, understanding that Beau was sharing more than just facts. He was offering a glimpse of his deeper self, his hopes and uncertainties. It's a good cabin, she said softly. Strong bones, as they say. It just needs care. Yes, he agreed, and she knew they were speaking of more than just the structure. That's what I thought too. They fell silent after that, but something had shifted between them. A door opened, a possibility acknowledged if not yet explored. Morning brought a flurry of activity as they broke camp for the last time. They rode mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the miles to Eagle Pass dwindled. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Beau reined in Samson. There it is, he said, pointing to the valley below where a small settlement huddled beside a rushing river. Eagle Pass. Brenna took in the scatter of buildings, weathered clapboard, and log structures clustered around what appeared to be a main street, smoke rising from chimneys, a church steeple standing tall against the mountainous backdrop. It was smaller than she'd imagined, yet somehow exactly right. It's lovely, she said honestly. Beau studied her profile. It's rough, he corrected. Hard living, especially in winter, but the people are good for the most part. They descended into the valley, approaching the town as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the muddy street. A few residents paused in their activities to watch their arrival with curious eyes. Beau nodded to several people as they rode toward a two-story building with a sign reading Chen's boarding house in neat black letters. A small woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun stood on the porch, arms folded across her chest. Despite her diminutive stature, there was an unmistakable authority in her bearing. "Callahan," she called as they approached. "Bringing strays again, I see." Beau dismounted, then helped Brenna down. "Mrs. Chen," he greeted the woman with a respectful nod. "This is Miss Brenna Sullivan. She's in need of lodging and perhaps employment. Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes assessed Brenna from head to toe, taking in the borrowed men's clothing, the travel-worn appearance, and apparently finding something worthwhile beneath it all. "Another runaway," she stated rather than asked. "Trouble following?" Brenna straightened her spine. "Possibly," she answered honestly, "but I don't intend to bring it to your doorstep." A flicker of approval crossed the older woman's face. "Direct. Good." She jerked her head toward the door. "Come in, then. We'll talk terms." As Mrs. Chen turned to enter the boarding house, Beau touched Brenna's elbow lightly. "She's fair," he said quietly. "Tough but fair. You can trust her. Will you?" Brenna hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Will you come in as well?" Something complicated passed across his features. "Best I see to Samson first," he said. "Get him stabled and fed. I'll come find you after." Brenna nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course." Inside, Mrs. Chen's boarding house was impeccably clean, with simple but comfortable furnishings. The older woman led Brenna to a small office off the main hallway, gesturing for her to sit. "Now," Mrs. Chen said, settling behind a desk, "Callahan clearly thinks you're worth helping, which counts for something. He doesn't waste time on fools or those looking for handouts." Her direct gaze was penetrating. "What can you do besides wear men's clothing poorly?" Despite herself, Brenna smiled at the blunt assessment. "I can read and write with proficiency. I know mathematics, bookkeeping, French, and I play piano, though I doubt that's of much use here." Mrs. Chen considered this information. "We have need of someone to teach the children. Current arrangement is inadequate farmer's wife with little education herself trying to manage 20 children of varying ages." She leaned forward. "Could you handle such a task?" Brenna felt a surge of excitement. "Yes," she said confidently. "I would need materials, of course, and time to prepare, but yes, I believe I could." "Pay is poor," Mrs. Chen warned. "Room and board here plus $3 weekly. Town can't afford more." "That would be acceptable," Brenna replied, surprised at how little the modest sum bothered her. "When could I start?" "Monday," Mrs. Chen said decisively. 4 days to prepare. I'll show you to your room now. You look like you need a bath and proper clothes." She stood. "One more thing. Whatever you're running from or whoever, I don't tolerate trouble in my house. Keep it outside or move on." "Clear." "Perfectly," Brenna assured her. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small dresser. The window overlooked the town's main street, offering a view of the mountains beyond. After days on the trail, it seemed palatial to Brenna. "Baths down the hall," Mrs. Chen informed her. "I'll have hot water brought up. Dinner's at 6. She paused at the door. "And Miss Sullivan. One of my other boarders is near your size. I'll see if she has a dress you can borrow until you can purchase your own." Left alone, Brenna sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from wilderness survival to civilization, however rustic. She had made it to Eagle Pass. She had found potential employment, lodging. She was safe, for now at least. Yet something felt incomplete, unresolved. Her thoughts turned to Beau, wondering if he would indeed return as promised or if, having delivered her safely, he would consider his obligation fulfilled and move on. The prospect of never seeing him again created an ache she hadn't anticipated when they'd begun their journey. True to her word, Mrs. Chen soon had a bath prepared, and Brenna luxuriated in the simple pleasure of hot water and soap. By the time she had dressed in the borrowed gown, a simple blue calico that was indeed a reasonable fit, and pinned up her hair, she felt almost human again. Descending to the dining room for the evening meal, she found a half-dozen other boarders already seated. They greeted her with varying degrees of curiosity and welcome, but Beau was noticeably absent. Disappointment curled through her as she took a seat beside a friendly-looking older man who introduced himself as the town's barber. The meal was simple but hearty beef stew, fresh bread and applesauce, and the conversation flowed easily around her. The other boarders were clearly curious about the newcomer, but Mrs. Chen's presence seemed to discourage overly intrusive questions. Brenna was just finishing her meal when the front door opened, and Beau stepped into the dining room. He had clearly taken time to clean up. His hair was damp, his face freshly shaved, his clothing clean if still worn. Their eyes met across the room, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Callahan," Mrs. Chen acknowledged. "Thought you might have moved on already." "Not yet," he replied, his eyes still on Brenna. "Thought I'd stay a few days, if you have a room available, Mrs." Chen's sharp gaze moved between them, missing nothing. "Room at the end of the hall upstairs is free," she said after a moment. "Same rate as always. Much obliged." He finally looked away from Brenna to address their hostess. "Any of that stew left? Been living on trail rations too long." After dinner, Brenna found herself on the boarding house's back porch, breathing in the cool evening air and watching the stars appear one by one above the mountains. The door opened behind her, and she knew without turning that it was Beau, settling in all right. He asked, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "Yes," she replied. "Mrs. Chen has offered me the position of teacher. I start Monday." "That's good," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "You'll do well at it." They stood in silence for a moment, both aware of the unspoken questions between them. "How long will you stay?" Brenna finally asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Beau was quiet for a long moment. "Not sure yet," he admitted. "Got some thinking to do. About." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "About what I want, where I belong." His eyes held hers. "Things that seemed clear before are less so now." Brenna's heart quickened at the implication. "Because of our journey, because of you," he said simply. "Meeting you. It changed things." The directness of his admission took her breath away. "For me as well," she confessed softly. Beau's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the porch railing, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I'm not good with fancy words," he said. "Never have been. But I know when something matters, when it's worth holding on to." His eyes never left hers. "I'd like to see where this road leads, Brenna, if you're willing." The simple honesty of his declaration moved her more than any flowery speech could have. "I'd like that too," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. His smile then was like sunrise after the longest night, transforming his weathered features with joy. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down to press his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. When they parted, Brenna knew with certainty that her journey had not ended with their arrival in Eagle Pass. It had merely changed direction. The following days took on a rhythm that was both new and deeply satisfying. Brenna spent her mornings preparing for her teaching duties, reviewing the few available textbooks and creating lesson plans. Her afternoons were often spent with Beau, who showed her around Eagle Pass, introducing her to residents and helping her understand the community she had joined. Their evenings typically found them on the boarding house porch, talking for hours as they grew to know each other beyond the intense but limited context of their journey. Brenna learned of Beau's dreams to perhaps guide less and settle more, to create something lasting. He learned of her love of music, her desire to make a difference, her determination to build a life on her own terms. On Saturday evening, as they walked along the river that gave Eagle Pass its name, Beau took her hand in his, a gesture that had become natural between them. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone casual though she sensed underlying tension, "about McCready's cabin." "Oh," Brenna's heart quickened. "It's good land," he continued. "Plenty of game, good water. Not too far from here, 3 days' ride in good weather." He glanced at her. "Been thinking about going back, fixing it up proper." "It would make a fine home," she agreed carefully, not wanting to presume his meaning. Beau stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Thing is," he said, meeting her eyes directly, "I can't imagine it as a home anymore without you in it." Brenna's breath caught. "Beau, I know it's fast," he interrupted, the words coming in a rush now. "Known each other barely 2 weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything." He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Brenna Sullivan. Love your courage, your mind, your heart. Love the way you face each challenge head on. Love the person I am when I'm with you." Tears welled in Brenna's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I thought possible in such a short time." Relief and joy transformed his face. "Then marry me," he said, the words somewhere between a question and a statement. "Not right away if you're not ready, I'll wait, but say someday you will." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Not someday soon as we can arrange it." His kiss then was different from the gentle explorations they had shared before, deeper, filled with passion and promise, a sealing of their commitment to each other. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, the look in his eyes made her feel more cherished than she had ever imagined possible. "I need to go back to the cabin," he said, his voice husky. "Make it ready, repair what needs fixing. It'll take a few weeks, maybe a month." "I'll come with you," Brenna offered immediately. Beau shook his head, though reluctantly. "Better if you stay, get the school established." "I'll work faster alone and then—" His thumb traced her cheekbone. "And then I'll come back for you and we can start our life together proper." Though she hated the thought of separation, Brenna recognized the practical wisdom in his plan. 1 month, she agreed. "Not a day longer." "Not a day longer," he promised, sealing the vow with another kiss. 2 days later, Brenna stood beside Samson, her hand on Beau's knee as he prepared to depart. The town was just waking around them, the early morning light casting long shadows down the muddy main street. "You have everything?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Enough supplies." "Everything I need," he assured her, his eyes never leaving her face as if memorizing every detail. "I'll be back before you know it." "Be careful," she urged. "No unnecessary risks." His smile was tender. "Yes, madam." He leaned down from the saddle to kiss her one last time. "Keep those children in line. I want to hear all about your teaching adventures when I return." "I will," she promised. "I love you, Beau Callahan." "And I love you, Brenna Sullivan." Soon to be Brenna Callahan, if I have anything to say about it. With a final touch of her hand, he straightened in the saddle and urged Samson forward. Brenna watched until horse and rider disappeared around the bend in the road, then turned back to the boarding house, already counting the days until his return. The following weeks were a blur of activity as Brenna threw herself into her new role as Eagle Pass's teacher. The school was little more than a converted storage building with rough benches and tables, but the children, 23 of them ranging in age from 6 to 16, were eager to learn. Despite occasional challenges, Brenna found deep satisfaction in the work, watching young minds expand under her guidance. She quickly became part of the community, invited to Sunday dinners and social gatherings. Mrs. Chen proved to be not just an employer but a mentor and, increasingly, a friend, offering practical advice and silent support in equal measure. Through it all, Brenna waited for Beau's return, marking off days on a small calendar she kept beside her bed. 20 days after his departure, a letter arrived, carried by a traveler passing through from the direction of Macready's cabin. "Progress is good," Beau had written in his bold, if somewhat uneven hand. "Roof is fixed, walls are sound, building furniture now. 1 more week should do it. I miss you more than words can say." Brenna pressed the letter to her heart, comforted by the tangible evidence of his thoughts and plans. 1 more week, just 7 more days. 6 days later, as Brenna was dismissing her students for the afternoon, a commotion on the main street drew her attention. Stepping outside, she froze at the sight of 3 well-dressed men on horseback, clearly not locals or typical travelers. The lead rider, a tall man with cold eyes and an expensive coat, was speaking to the town's blacksmith, who pointed directly at the school building. Fear clenched in Brenna's stomach as the rider turned his gaze toward her. She would recognize Stuart Hargrove anywhere, even after nearly a month away from Denver. "Miss Sullivan," he called, urging his horse forward. "What a pleasure to find you at last." Brenna stood her ground, though every instinct screamed for her to run. "Mr. Hargrove," she acknowledged coldly. "What brings you to Eagle Pass?" He dismounted with fluid grace, handing his reins to one of his companions. "Why, you do, of course." His smile never reached his eyes. "Your father's will was quite clear about our arrangement. I've come to bring you home and fulfill his wishes." "I have no home in Denver anymore," Brenna replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. "And I have no intention of marrying you, regardless of my father's wishes." Hargrove's expression hardened. "I'm afraid you have little choice in the matter. Your father's estate remains in my control until our marriage. Without it, you have nothing." "I have everything I need right here," she countered, aware that a small crowd of townspeople had begun to gather, watching the confrontation with concern. A charming sentiment. Hargrove's tone made the words an insult. "But I'm afraid I must insist. We leave tomorrow morning." He glanced around with undisguised disdain. "I've secured rooms at what passes for a hotel in this settlement. I suggest you use the evening to gather your belongings and say your goodbyes. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." The voice came from behind Brenna, firm and unmistakable. She turned to find Mrs. Chen standing on the school steps, her small figure radiating determination. "This doesn't concern you, madam," Hargrove said dismissively. "Any threat to one of my boarders concerns me very much, Mrs. Chen replied, moving to stand beside Brenna. "Miss Sullivan has found employment and residence here. She is under the protection of this community." Hargrove's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. "Protection? From what? I am her fiancé, carrying out her father's express wishes." "I never agreed to marry you," Brenna interjected. "And my father didn't know the truth about you when he made those arrangements." A dangerous light entered Hargrove's eyes. "Be careful, Brenna. Such accusations could prove damaging to your reputation." "Not as damaging as the truth about your first wife's death," she shot back, beyond caring about caution now. The crowd murmured at this, and Hargrove's face tightened with anger. "This grows tedious," he snapped. "Pack your things. We leave at first light." He turned to his companions. "Ensure Miss Sullivan doesn't wander off again." As the men moved to flank her, Several townspeople stepped forward, including the blacksmith and the barber from the boarding house. The tension in the air was palpable. "There will be no need for that," came a new voice, clear and authoritative. The crowd parted to reveal Sheriff Thomas, Eagle Pass's sole lawman, approaching with a measured stride. "What seems to be the problem here?" Hargrove smoothed his expression, assuming a more reasonable tone. "No problem at all, Sheriff. I'm simply retrieving my fiancée who left Denver rather impulsively several weeks ago." Sheriff Thomas turned to Brenna. "That true, Miss Sullivan? This man your fiancé?" "No," Brenna stated firmly. "I never agreed to marry him. I came to Eagle Pass to start a new life, and I have no intention of returning to Denver." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Well then, Mr. Hargrove, seems to me the lady's made her choice clear." "This is absurd," Hargrove sputtered. "She has obligations, legal and moral." Her father is dead," Mrs. Chen interrupted bluntly. "And she is of age to make her own decisions." Sheriff Thomas held up a hand for silence. "Mr. Hargrove, you're welcome to stay in our town as a visitor, but I won't have you or your men harassing Miss Sullivan. She's a valued member of our community now." Fury flashed across Hargrove's face before he mastered it. "Very well," he said tightly. "But this isn't over. I'll return tomorrow and we'll discuss this further with legal documentation that may clarify the situation." He turned on his heel, mounting his horse with unnecessary force. "Until tomorrow, Brenna." As Hargrove and his men rode toward the hotel, Brenna felt her knees weaken with relief and renewed fear. Mrs. Chen's steady hand on her arm guided her back toward the boarding house. "Come," the older woman said. "We must prepare." "Prepare for what?" Brenna asked, still shaken by the confrontation. Mrs. Chen's expression was grimly determined. "For whatever may come. That man will not leave easily, I think." That evening, after a subdued dinner during which the other boarders offered their support, and Sheriff Thomas stopped by to assure her of his protection, Brenna sat in Mrs. Chen's small office, discussing options. "He may indeed have legal documents," Mrs. Chen acknowledged. "Your father's will, perhaps, or other papers that could complicate matters." "Even so, he can't force me to marry him," Brenna insisted. "Can he?" "No," Sheriff Thomas confirmed, "but he could make things difficult. If your father left conditions in his will, there might be financial considerations." "I don't care about the money," Brenna said firmly. "I've found a new life here, a purpose. That's worth more than any inheritance." "And Callahan?" Mrs. Chen asked pointedly. "What of him?" Brenna felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "Beau and we plan to marry when he returns." Sheriff Thomas and Mrs. Chen exchanged glances. "Then perhaps," the sheriff suggested, "we should try to get word to him. Hargrove doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily." "He's due back any day," Brenna pointed out, "and we don't know exactly where he is right now." "We wait then," Mrs. Chen decided. "But not idly. Sheriff, perhaps you could inquire about what legal rights this man truly has. And Brenna, you should continue your normal routine. Show no fear." Though sleep eluded her that night, Brenna took Mrs. Chen's advice to heart. The next morning, she opened the school as usual, greeting her students with forced cheerfulness. Throughout the day, she was aware of being watched Hargrove's men taking turns observing the schoolhouse from a distance. When school dismissed, Sheriff Thomas was waiting to escort her back to the boarding house. "Hargrove's been asking questions all over town," he informed her quietly. "Trying to find out how you got here, who helped you." A chill ran through Brenna. "Has anyone mentioned Beau?" "Not that I've heard. Most folks are being close-mouthed, which is good." He glanced at her. "But Hargrove's determined. He's showing papers around your father's will, apparently, and some kind of guardianship document." "Guardianship?" Brenna was incredulous. "I'm 23 years old." Different rules for unmarried women in some places, the sheriff said grimly. Not saying it would hold up here, but it's causing talk. At the boarding house, Mrs. Chen confirmed this news. He's offering a reward now, she added, for information about your abductor, his word, not mine. This is ridiculous, Brenna fumed. I wasn't abducted. I left of my own free will. He's trying to build a case, Mrs. Chen said shrewdly. Make it seem as if you were coerced or manipulated, if he can convince enough people or the right people. She didn't need to finish the thought. Brenna understood the dangerous game Hargrove was playing, painting himself as the concerned fiancé searching for his missing beloved. Rather than the controlling man she knew him to be. 3 tense days passed in this manner, with Hargrove's presence casting a shadow over the town. Each evening, Brenna scanned the road for any sign of Beau, her anxiety growing. He was due back any day now, unaware of the danger waiting. On the 4th morning, as Brenna was walking to the school, Hargrove intercepted her, stepping out from between 2 buildings with a smile that chilled her blood. "Good morning, Brenna," he said pleasantly, as if their previous confrontation had never happened. "You're looking well. Frontier life agrees with you, it seems." "What do you want, Stuart?" she asked, keeping her voice level despite her racing heart. "Just a moment of your time." He gestured to a bench outside the general store. "Shall we sit?" Aware that refusing would only create a scene, Brenner reluctantly took a seat, keeping as much distance between them as the small bench allowed. "I've been patient," Hargrove began. "Given you time to reconsider this adventure, but my patience has limits." "As does mine," Brenner replied. "I've made my position clear." "Have you considered the consequences?" he asked, his tone conversational though his eyes were hard. "Not just for yourself, but for those who have helped you. This town, for instance, harboring a woman who has effectively stolen from her rightful guardian." Anger flashed through Brenna. "I stole nothing. The money I took was mine, gifts from my mother's family that father always kept separate from the household accounts." "A matter of interpretation," Hargrove dismissed. "The point is, I could make things very difficult for these people you've grown so fond of. Legal challenges, economic pressure. I have connections throughout the territory." The threat was unmistakable and all the more effective for being directed at others rather than herself. "You would punish an entire town just to force my compliance. I prefer to think of it as removing obstacles." His smile was thin, but yes, if necessary. Brenna felt sick at the calculated cruelty of his strategy. "What do you want, Stuart, truly?" "It can't just be me. There are plenty of suitable women in Denver society who would welcome your attention." Something flickered in his expression, rage, quickly suppressed. "What I want is what I'm owed. Your father built his bank with my family's investments. Our marriage was to cement that partnership for the next generation." His voice hardened. "No one walks away from a deal with me, Brenna. No one." It was about pride, she realized. Control. Her defiance had wounded his ego, and that, more than any genuine attachment, drove his pursuit. "I'll give you one more day to reconsider," he said, standing. "After that, I begin making examples, starting with that Chinese woman who seems so protective of you." He straightened his coat. "Choose wisely." As he walked away, Brenner remained on the bench, her mind racing. Hargrove was capable of carrying out his threats, she had no doubt of that. The question was how to protect the people who had shown her such kindness without sacrificing her own freedom. That evening, as she sat with Mrs. Chen discussing the latest developments, a commotion at the front of the boarding house drew their attention. Hurrying to the entryway, Brenna's heart leapt at the sight of Beau standing in the doorway, travel-worn but whole. "Beau," she cried, rushing forward into his embrace. His arms tightened around her, lifting her slightly off the ground in his enthusiasm. "Missed you something fierce," he murmured against her hair before setting her down and looking more closely at her face. "What's wrong? You look worried." Before she could explain, Mrs. Chen intervened. "Come inside, Callahan. There have been developments you need to know about." Over a hastily prepared meal, they brought Beau up to speed on Hargrove's arrival and threats. His expression darkened progressively as the story unfolded, his jaw tightening with anger. "So he's threatening the town now," he summarized when they'd finished. "To force Brenna's hand." "Essentially, yes," Mrs. Chen confirmed. "And he may have legal grounds to create significant problems, regardless of whether he can actually compel Brenna to return with him." Beau's hand found Brenna's under the table, squeezing reassuringly. "Well, he's about to discover that his plans have hit a snag." "What do you mean?" Brenna asked. Beau glanced at Mrs. Chen, who nodded slightly, then reached into his pocket to withdraw a folded document. "Went to see Judge Rawlins in Clear Creek before coming back," he explained, handing the paper to Brenna. "Figured it might simplify things." Unfolding the document, Brenna scanned the official text, her eyes widening as she comprehended its meaning. "This is a marriage license," she breathed. "With both our names." "Judge Rawlins is an old friend," Beau said, his eyes never leaving her face. "He was happy to issue it, knowing my intentions. All it needs is our signatures and a witness or two." He hesitated. "If you're still willing, that is." "Willing." Brenna laughed, joy bubbling up despite the seriousness of their situation. "Beau Callahan, I have never been more willing of anything in my life." Mrs. Chen cleared her throat, a rare smile softening her features. "Well then, I believe Sheriff Thomas would make an excellent witness, and I would be honored to serve as the second." "Tonight?" Brenna asked, suddenly eager to formalize their bond. "No time like the present," Beau agreed, his smile lighting his eyes. "Especially with Hargrove breathing down our necks." Within the hour, Sheriff Thomas had been summoned, and the small group gathered in Mrs. Chen's parlor. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with Beau and Brenna exchanging simple vows and rings. Beau had brought a slender gold band that had belonged to his mother, while Mrs. Chen surprisingly produced a man's ring that she said had been her husband's. "Been saving it for a worthy cause," she explained with unusual sentimentality. "This seems fitting." With their signatures on the license and those of their witnesses, it was done. Brenna Sullivan became Brenna Callahan in a matter of minutes, the simple ceremony more meaningful to her than any elaborate wedding could have been. "Congratulations," Sheriff Thomas said, shaking Beau's hand and kissing Brenna's cheek. "Now, what shall we do about our unwelcome visitor?" "I'll handle Hargrove," Beau stated, his arm protective around Brenna's waist. "We'll handle him," Brenna corrected gently. "Together." Morning found them walking arm in arm toward the hotel where Hargrove was staying, the marriage license safely tucked in Beau's pocket. They had agreed on a direct approach, preferring to confront the situation head-on rather than wait for Hargrove to make his next move. They found him taking breakfast in the hotel's small dining room, his men at a nearby table. His expression registered shock at the sight of Beau, quickly masked by his customary cool control. "Brenna," he greeted, ignoring Beau entirely. "I trust you've reconsidered your position." "I have," she replied, her voice steady, "and my answer remains no. I will not be returning to Denver with you now or ever." Hargrove's gaze flicked to Beau, then back to her. "I see you found new protection. How convenient." His smile was cold. "Unfortunately, it changes nothing." "My legal rights no longer exist," Beau interrupted, producing the marriage license and placing it on the table. "As of last night, Brenna is my wife. Whatever arrangements her father made are now irrelevant." Hargrove stared at the document, his face flushing with anger. "This is preposterous," he sputtered. "A hastily arranged frontier marriage cannot override—" "It can and it does," Sheriff Thomas stated, having entered the dining room behind them. "The license is legitimate, signed by Judge Rawlins himself. Mrs. Callahan is now under her husband's protection, not yours." The use of her new name sent a thrill through Brenna, reinforcing the reality of their union. She met Hargrove's furious gaze without flinching. "It's over, Stewart. Go back to Denver. There's nothing for you here." For a moment she thought he might explode with rage. His hands clenched into fists and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. Then, with visible effort, he regained control. "This isn't the end," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "A marriage can be annulled, especially one so obviously arranged to circumvent legal obligations." "You're welcome to try," Beau replied evenly, "but I wouldn't recommend it. Frontier justice tends to be straightforward, and folks around here don't take kindly to men who threaten women." The implied warning hung in the air between them. After a long, tense moment, Hargrove stood, gesturing for his men to do the same. "Enjoy your rustic adventure, Brenna," he said, contempt dripping from every word. "When you tire of playing pioneer, you'll find Denver society less welcoming than you remember." "I won't be back," she assured him. "My life is here now, with my husband." Hargrove's eyes narrowed at Beau. "You have no idea what you've taken on, Callahan." He adjusted his coat with precise movements. "She'll bring you nothing but trouble." "Worth every bit of it," Beau replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Safe travels back to Denver, Hargrove. I suggest you start today." With a final venomous glance, Hargrove stalked from the dining room, his men following close behind. Through the window, they watched as he ordered his horse brought around, his movements sharp with suppressed fury. "He'll leave today," Sheriff Thomas predicted. "But I wouldn't be surprised if he tries legal challenges from Denver." "Let him try," Brenna said, feeling lighter than she had in days. "We'll face whatever comes together." "Together," Beau agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. "Speaking of which, I have something to show you." After confirming with Sheriff Thomas that he would monitor Hargrove's departure, they borrowed a horse from the livery stable, and Beau led Brenna to the edge of town. There, tethered to a tree, was a wagon loaded with what appeared to be furniture and household goods. "What's all this?" Brenna asked, puzzled. Beau's smile was proud as he helped her examine the contents. "Our home," he explained. "Or parts of it anyway. Bed frame I built, table and chairs, cooking things, even some curtains Mrs. Powell at the general store helped me choose." He looked suddenly uncertain. "Do you like it?" Tears welled in Brenna's eyes as she ran her hand over the smooth wood of a rocking chair. "You made these, for us." "For you mostly," he admitted. "Wanted you to have proper things, not just wilderness survival necessities." The care and thought evident in each piece touched her deeply. "They're beautiful," she said honestly. "Perfect." Relief and pleasure crossed his face. "Thought we might head back to the cabin tomorrow if you're ready. School term's nearly done from what Mrs. Chen tells me, and summer would give us time to really settle in before winter." "What about my teaching?" Brenna asked, though the idea of making a home with Beau in the wilderness called to her more strongly than she had anticipated. "Talk to Sheriff Thomas about that," Beau said. "There's talk of building a proper school closer to where will be. Several families have settled in that valley over the past year. They'd welcome a teacher come fall." The pieces were falling into place with a rightness that took Brenna's breath away. "Then yes," she said, taking his hands in hers. "Let's go home." The following morning, with Hargrove confirmed to have left town and hearty farewells from Mrs. Chen and the other townspeople who had become friends, they set out for McCready's cabin, now their cabin. Beau drove the wagon with their new possessions while Brenna rode beside him on Samson, her heart full of anticipation. The journey was easier than their previous trek, with clear weather and Beau's intimate knowledge of the route. They camped 2 nights along the way, and on the 3rd day, as afternoon sunshine filtered through the pines, they crested the final ridge to see the cabin below. Brenna's breath caught at the transformation. The sagging roof had been repaired, the walls chinked with fresh mud, new glass in the windows. A small corral had been added beside the lean-to, and what looked like the beginnings of a garden plot was marked out near the front door. "Oh, Beau," she breathed, taking in the scene. "It's wonderful." His eyes were on her face rather than the cabin, gauging her reaction. "It's still rough," he cautioned. "Lots to do yet." "It's perfect," she insisted. "Absolutely perfect." They made their way down to the clearing, and Beau helped her from Samson before leading her to the cabin door. There he paused, a smile tugging at his lips. "Traditionally," he said, "I believe I'm supposed to carry my bride across the threshold." Before she could respond, he had swept her into his arms, kicking the door open and carrying her inside with a flourish that made her laugh with delight. The interior was as transformed as the exterior, the floor swept clean, the fireplace rebuilt, new shelves lining one wall. A table and chairs stood in one corner, while the area where they had first huddled for warmth now held a small sofa covered in what looked like deer hide. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," Beau said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Home," Brenna repeated, the word holding new meaning now. She turned in his embrace to face him fully. "I never imagined when I fled Denver that I would find not just safety but this, love, purpose. A true partner. And I never imagined when I found a half-frozen woman in an abandoned cabin that I'd find the other half of my soul," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Guess we both got luckier than we deserved." "Not luck," Brenna corrected, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "Fate. This cabin was waiting for us both all along." As Beau's arms tightened around her, deepening their kiss in the home they would build together, Brenna knew with absolute certainty that her desperate flight had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Over the following months, they settled into a rhythm of life that blended hard work with profound contentment. The cabin gradually became truly theirs, with Beau's handcrafted furniture complemented by Brenna's touches, wildflowers in jars on the table, a quilt she learned to piece under Mrs. Chen's guidance, herbs hanging to dry from the ceiling beams. Summer passed in a blaze of activity as they prepared for winter hunting, preserving food, expanding the garden, chopping endless cords of firewood. Beau taught Brenna the skills she needed to thrive in their mountain home, from identifying edible plants to basic trap setting, while she brought her own knowledge to their partnership, keeping accounts and beginning to teach him to read better than he had before. In August, they traveled back to Eagle Pass for supplies and to meet with the families who hoped to establish a school near their valley. The small community, 3 homesteading families with a total of 11 children, welcomed Brenna eagerly, and plans were made for classes to begin in September in a converted barn, until a proper schoolhouse could be built. On their return journey, as they camped beneath the stars halfway between town and home, Brenna shared news she had been saving for the right moment. "Beau," she said, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the fire, "I've been meaning to tell you something." He turned to look at her, concern flickering across his features. "Everything all right?" she smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "More than all right. We're going to have a baby come spring." The wonder that transformed his face was something Brenna knew she would remember all her days. "A baby," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. You're sure? As sure as I can be, she confirmed. Mrs. Chen noticed the signs before I did, truth be told. Said she's rarely wrong about such things. Beau's hand remained on her stomach, as if already trying to connect with the new life growing within. A family, he said, awe in his voice. Our family. The first of many, I hope, Brenna replied, covering his hand with her own. Our cabin has room to grow. That night, as they lay together beneath the vast canopy of stars, Beau whispered plans and dreams against her skin, a cradle he would carve, expansions to the cabin as their family grew, the generations that might someday call their mountain valley home. Thank you, he murmured as they drifted toward sleep, for running away, for finding my cabin, for lighting a fire in more ways than one. Thank you for finding me, she replied, nestling closer, for seeing something worth saving. We saved each other, he corrected gently. And that's what we'll keep doing every day for the rest of our lives. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Brenna divided her time between teaching in the makeshift school and preparing their cabin for the coming winter and the spring arrival that would change their lives forever. Beau added a small second room to the cabin, a nursery that would eventually become a bedroom as their child grew. Word came from Eagle Pass that Stuart Hargrove had indeed attempted legal challenges to their marriage, but Judge Rawlins had firmly dismissed them. Whether out of recognition of defeat or simply distraction by new pursuits, Hargrove eventually abandoned his efforts, leaving Brenna truly free to embrace her new life. Winter settled over the mountains, wrapping their valley in a blanket of pristine white. Unlike the desperate cold of her first mountain winter, Brenna now found beauty in the season, the crystalline stillness of snow-laden pines, the warmth of their snug cabin, the luxury of time with Beau as the world outside slowed its pace. As her body changed, growing round with their child, Beau's tenderness only deepened. He fashioned a softer mattress for their bed, carved beautiful toys for the baby, and took over more of the strenuous chores without ever making Brenna feel diminished or incapable. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and new growth, and with it came their daughter Sarah Grace Callahan, born on a clear April morning with Mrs. Chen in attendance, having made the journey from Eagle Pass specifically for the occasion. She has your eyes, Brenna whispered as they gazed at their newborn daughter, her tiny hand wrapped around Beau's finger with surprising strength. And your determination, I think. But your beauty, Beau countered, his voice rough with emotion, and hopefully your brains, Mrs. Chen, watching from nearby, allowed herself a rare smile. She is perfect, the older woman pronounced. A true blessing. As spring deepened into summer, their small family settled into new rhythms. The school near their home was finally completed, a simple but sturdy building that would serve the growing community for years to come. Brenna resumed teaching with Sarah, often nestled in a sling against her chest, the children delighted by their tiny assistant teacher. On the anniversary of the day Beau had found Brenna in the abandoned cabin, they hosted a gathering for their neighbors and friends from Eagle Pass. The cabin and surrounding clearing were transformed by lanterns and flowers, trestle tables laden with food, music provided by a fiddler from town. As twilight descended and Sarah slept peacefully in a cradle nearby, Beau led Brenna to the center of the clearing for a dance. Around them, their guests clapped in time to the music, but Brenna was aware only of Beau's arms around her, the love in his eyes as he gazed down at her. Happy? He asked simply. Completely, she answered without hesitation. You, his smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. More than I ever thought possible. He glanced toward their sleeping daughter, then back to Brenna. Thank you for our life together. As they danced beneath the emerging stars, surrounded by the community they had built, and the home they had created together. Brenna reflected on the desperate flight that had led her to this moment. What had begun as an escape had become a journey home, not to a place, but to the person with whom she was meant to share her life. In a wilderness cabin that had once stood abandoned, they had found not just shelter but belonging, not just company but love, creating a home that would nurture generations to come.